So there is this quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. Maybe you know this individual is a good scientist, and he says a great challenge of life is knowing enough to think you are right, but not know enough to know that you are wrong. And so that's interesting that someone that's so knowledgeable is believed to be one of the guru of knowledge in America, and he thinks that you never know enough, and a danger is to when you start thinking that you know. And when you start thinking that you know, therefore you think that your ideas are good and that you don't need to support them, and that becomes a danger. And so entrepreneurs are people that need to understand that the best skills is to do research and to be a leader with supporting evidence in order to sell your ideas. You need to sell your ideas, you need to sell yourself, you need to understand who's your market, who's your target, you need to understand what's your image, what's your positioning, and you need to constantly innovate, differentiate yourself, and therefore understand the concept of J&D, just noticeable difference, in order to survive in your environment. So that's again my little boiler template on how I think an entrepreneur needs to think, and I've tried to repeat it X amount of time every time I was with you, so that way you can sort of get the concept, the principles, constantly thinking facts is all that matters, and facts have to be collected. How do you collect facts? So you collect facts by doing research, and this research is, there's three layers of research. There is the exploratory research, which is just about collecting data that is already existing. So the first data that you collect that is existing is called secondary data. The second data that you collect yourself, because it's new, it's called primary data. In the exploratory research, most of the primary data that you collect is qualitative, because you don't have the opportunity of collecting quantitative data, because in the exploratory research, you're not testing hypotheses, you're generating hypotheses. So this exploratory research oftentimes is if it's well done, is just enough in order to get enough research in order to make decisions and feel somewhat confident about the decision that you're making. Following this, if you have the resources and time, you can follow up with a descriptive research. So the most common descriptive research is a questionnaire. And therefore, a questionnaire is not going to look so much or at all at a qualitative data, it's going to look at quantitative data. The difference between qualitative and quantitative is really the concept of the reliability of the data. The more you want the data to be reliable, the more you're going to go into quantitative data, which means you're going to connect hundreds and thousands of data points from different people. And therefore, the quantity is going to make it more reliable. Often, but however, the validity, which means are you getting answers to the questions that you really mean to have answered, is not um, gain from the quantity of people being asked, but it's the from the quality of the questions, from the quality of the interpretation, from the quality of the person asking the questions. So reliability and validity are constantly sort of being compromised. If you do too much reliability, usually you compromise validity, and if you do too much validity, usually you compromise reliability. And this is sort of a balance that you have to take into account, because there's no such a thing as a perfect data. Perfect data is too expensive, it's too time consuming, and businesses now and opportunities are knocking at the door right now. So you have to take decision, and you can't be procrastinating, or you cannot be looking for perfection and perfection in just collecting the data. Then the third layer of research is causal research, is when you try to really find cause and effects. And finding cause and effects is, again, requires quantitative, so large amount of data, and it's done through what's called an experiment, where you would have different treatments, some with like an increase of the amount of treatment that you would give, or a decrease of the amount of treatment that you will give, in order to see what's the right amount that generates enough or just noticeable difference. You also going to have a treatment where there's nothing new, and just to show that people are not responding going in one direction, because of luck. When you do nothing, their response is the same. When you do a lot, their response is changing. But how much change do you need to do in order to get a change of response? That's what you're adjusting. So if we think of in terms of decreasing the price, should you decrease the price by 50%? Maybe 50% is too much. Maybe you'll get the same response with 10%. So that could be done through an experiment where you try 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, 10%, 15%, and then you will see people responses based on those different percentage, and then you will pinpoint the most accurate amount of percentage that gives you the biggest return on investment, and that's the one that you select. It's not just price. It could be a change of features on the product. It could be a message. It could be a slogan. It could be a visual design or something like this. You will try to experiment and see cause and effect between these different uh, treatments to the customers. Obviously, causal research is very effective, is very reliable. It's also very, for the most part, very valid. So it's as good as it gets when it comes to research, but it's also the most time consuming, the most expensive, and the one that requires the most skills and the most people to take care of this. So it's not for small businesses for the most part. And therefore, for small businesses, I would recommend doing exploratory research. For this class, I would recommend doing exploratory research. I know there's a lot of professors that require exploratory and descriptive research when you do consulting. I don't. The reason is because people don't understand that to do good descriptive research, you actually need to do excellent exploratory research. And if you do excellent exploratory research, most of the time you have enough answers to your question that you don't need to go in descriptive. The other thing is, again, uh, how long does it take to take a good exploratory research? I mean, it takes a month. And so then to do the descriptive, it takes maybe another month or 2 other months after that. So that's 3 months. You don't have the time to really do a good job. So instead of butchering it and rushing yourself through the exploratory and the descriptive, I'd rather have some quality. And here again, hear me loud and clear, and I said that in the last class, is focus on exploratory research. So in a layman word is ask people questions and read a lot of data, and then make connection between what people are saying as individual. So it's not going to be quantitative. You only ask 12 people, and then collect data. So you start by looking at data. So it's like Google and databases. Then you get some ID. Talk to some people. Then you get some IDs. They say something kind of strange. You use this response that was kind of off the beaten path, and then you go search to see what big databases may be saying. And by going back and forth and doing these iterative jobs, normally you can find points to make decisions. So these points to make decisions are essentially looking at your environment, looking at constraints, trying to understand the strength, the forces, the factors in your environment that you're going to have to react and adapt. Now, we're going to look at a quick video of a gentleman called Marcus Lemonis. Anyone knows Marcus Lemonis? So a brief video, just a minute and 12, but so rich in information, extremely rich information, because what you need to retain, I think, is the fact that you have to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a leader, but you have to be a leader with empathy, a leader with modesty, a leader who leads his or her team based on the concept that everybody needs each other, and we're all learning, and if it doesn't work, we'll fix it. It's okay. And there's no better way to learn than doing it yourself, kind of thing. And so there's no ego, at least it's not an ego into the person ego. Maybe the ego goes into the result, reaching objectives ego, and not ego in being the boss, and the ego because you are making money. I think money is a poor. Um, I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not a good objective for someone that wants to become an entrepreneur. I think understanding money, understanding profit, understanding margin, understanding value, that's very, very important. Being quick with numbers, having a sense of what things are worth, and having a sense of what people want to spend, I think is very important. But being someone that wants to get rich, that's not, that's rich fast, that's not very good. So wanting to
I just
become
gotta
rich,
say, I agree 100%. You're spot on, 100%.
yeah, wanting to get rich fast is usually a bad inspiration, because then you're going to make decisions just for the sake of money, and therefore decisions for the sake of money are very short-sighted. So a good entrepreneur is long-sighted. A good entrepreneur is someone that's going to lead people, and lead people by sharing their enthusiasm and giving stimulation. So people are going to probably want to follow someone that they feel they're going to get money from, successful from, but it can't be the only thing, because otherwise, if it doesn't work, then they drop you. And in business, most of the things don't work right away, and therefore you're going to be dropped fast. So you have to be very careful. And I think all you have to do is watch 5 random programs from Marcus Lemonis, and then try to remember what we just heard from him and what you heard from me. And you will see that there's a common denominator between all of these. And all of these people that are in business to get rich fast, it doesn't work. Or it worked one time, because sometimes you can also get lucky. But because life is short, but at the same time is long enough that you're gonna learn it the hard way. If it worked out for you, you got lucky, you're going to lose your money. You're going to, it goes fast. It's fast to spend money and slow to make money. So eventually it's going to come and bite them in the back. So again, when you're running these businesses, you have competitors. When you're running these businesses, you have customers. When you're running these businesses, you have to understand what the company can do. So what can we do? What does the market want, and who are our competitors trying to cover this request, this need that the consumer have. So identifying opportunities is very important. Having an understanding of the cost of satisfying the customers, having an understanding of the targets that we will serve, the level of satisfaction, the level of value that we will provide, and at the same time be just different enough that the consumers are gonna go by us. So I hope you have had the opportunity to start thinking about your opportunities, your ideas, who is gonna care, and how you're gonna serve these people. So this is a Vinylist. It's one of them, the samples that you have in your file inside Canvas. Again, if you go to Canvas, I've given you several one sheet, 7 go-to strategy, 7 startup report. You can look at them. You can see the common denominator. And here, what you have as a one page, one sheet, is you have an introduction about what's the idea. You have an introduction about what the product is going to be. You have an explanation of what are the opportunities. So here there's 4 opportunities that's supporting these ideas. And at the same time, there's some evaluation of the market using the TAM, SAM, SOM, simply to show that there is a market, and we can define this market. And again, the most difficult thing here is to find the penetration rate, which requires a little bit of finesse in order to sort of estimate what is the right number that you possibly will reach within the first year. This right number that you will reach within the first year, the penetration rate, is also very much based on how many competitors you have, how innovative you are, and at the same time, how much resources you're planning to execute inside. Because if you don't advertise very much, you won't have the same penetration rate that if you advertise a great amount of money. But if you advertise a great amount of money, is you need to have more resources. So you also have to sort of explain where are these capital are going to come. Where do we find opportunities? Anyone remember?
Facts.
There, opportunities are just facts. Exactly. Where do we find them?
By researching.
By researching. That's right. Where do you research?
You reach the market.
In the market. What's the name for the overall market? It starts with a E, E-N-V-I,
Environment.
Environment.
in the environment. So you do a market environment analysis. And what's your environment made of? It's made of two things, and they both start with M. Sorry.
Macro and micro.
Macro and micro. Thank you, Jake. So that's correct. So now, where are the opportunities? Where do you research the opportunities? In your environment. In your environment, looking at the macro and micro. So you have to remember this because trust me, this is not just because I gave it to you in a quiz in the past class and you will get it into a quiz again in this class. That's not the only reason why you want to remember this. Is because it's sort of the 101 of business. Is I'm in business, my thing is the environment. I look at the environment, I look for changes in the environment that are going to go against me or that are going to go in my favor. Against me, it's a threat. In my favor, it's an opportunity. Why do you do that? Because you eventually want to write a little plan analysis, which is called a SWOT analysis. And so this SWOT analysis is going to be looking at this environment with you being the first part of the company, your organization being the first part of what you're going to analyze in the environment in order to study your environment. So what is the company's strengths and weaknesses? What is the opportunities? So the opportunities is what we can take advantage of, and they're just facts, like Tamer said. The threats are the same, or rather the opposite. They're just facts, but that we cannot take advantage of, but they are going to be essentially making things harder for us. Why do you do all of this? Because you want to satisfy a customer. But what does that mean, satisfying a customer? That means two things. That means that people have needs. People have needs that you have to, one, satisfy, and two, people have needs that have perceived value. So satisfaction and value is the two things that you focus as a business. What is the value that we bring to the market? How much satisfaction do we bring to the market? The idea behind this, and I discussed that I learned in the past with you, is satisfaction is, best satisfaction is to not to give maximum satisfaction. Best satisfaction is to give exact satisfaction. So you don't want to under satisfy. You most of the time don't want to over satisfy. You just want to satisfy customers. And at the same time, satisfaction is something that people are able to measure after they purchase and when they use the product, versus value is what they measure while they are thinking of buying the product. So it's prior to purchase. So value is, what are the features, what are the warranties, what are the product benefits, what are the attributes, and how much does it cost? So what do I gain? What do I pay? Satisfaction is, what do I expect the performance to be, and what do I perceive the performance to be? Okay, so these concepts eventually generate an understanding that you have to create something called just noticeable difference. So I recommend to you today, tomorrow, for the next year to come, for you to remember this, the J and D. Whenever you're going to do a presentation in front of people, you have to say, at one time, I got to pitch the J and D. I don't think there's a business presentation where you would present and never mention the J and D. The J and D is like blood for a doctor. It's very difficult to be a doctor and having nothing to do with the patient that has to do with some kind of blood connection of whatever they're going to look at. So it's very, very important. So anytime you do presentation, just throw the J and D. The first time you're going to go throw that inside the discussion and presentation, people are going to say, wow, this person is really, it's a little scientist, is very knowledgeable. He's talking about this J and D, just noticeable difference, and the Weber effect, the fact that people get used to something, and then, therefore you have to change the Weber effect from time to time in order to create more noticeable difference. Trust, it's very, very important. So when you present to us, and I will be back in May, the last day of the class, just to see your presentation and to evaluate your presentation, your group presentation, I'm going to expect you to talk about the J and D. What's the just noticeable difference? What is your company? What are the just noticeable differences that you're offering? too much. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask a question. So are
Yeah,
you saying because we don't, whatever we're, selling, the service or product, we don't want it to look so foreign they don't know what the hell they're looking at. Like it should have some familiarity, but we need to kind of like differentiate ourselves in the market with something that is attractive, Is that what you
exactly. That's what I'm saying. What I'm
Okay.
saying is that and you use the correct term, which is that you, un, there's been some products that were amazing innovation. They were 2, 3 times, 10 times better than the product that they're replacing, and they failed. And they failed not because they were inferior product. On the contrary, they were far superior product, but they failed because they were too unfamiliar. So the concept of just noticeable difference says that if you are too familiar, too much the same, and you're trying to compete, you probably won't succeed because people have no reason to buy your product because you're too much the same. But if you are amazing, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you are too unfamiliar, people will also not feel confident, comfortable. So the just noticeable difference is this idea that people have to feel that they are familiar and that there is no, it's a no-brainer that there's essentially no change on what they are doing, and it's easy, it's just better, and they get it. It's almost like, imagine you buy a motorcycle in 1988 and there's no ABS, and then BMW comes with a motorcycle and it's exactly the same motorcycle than before, the same motorcycle as everybody else pretty much, but that motorcycle has ABS brakes on it, which means that when you brake, the wheel doesn't lock, and 90% of the time, you're not going to fall off the motorcycle. That ABS may be a JND or may not be a JND. So you do a test, you do an experiment, you do a research, and then you find that 90% of the people say, wow, that's a big difference. So you're telling me 7 or 8 times out of 10, I won't fall out of the motorcycle in the same given situation with all the motorcycle, but not that one because the ABS, there is ABS brake on it. Yes. So then the ABS becomes a just noticeable difference. And that's what happened when BMW did that. The motorcycle became a just noticeable difference. They had the first ABS. People say, oh, fine, that's got it. It's enough for a change. When what is the biggest hair care product company in the world? L'Oreal. When L'Oreal was created, he was an entrepreneur originally. He was created by one man, and this one man did a J&D. He created a dye, a hair dye. You could see that women were dyeing their hair and it didn't last. Every shampoo, it would disappear. So he created a dye that lasted a little bit longer. G&D is, instead of disappearing after one shampoo, it disappeared after 5 shampoos. So 5 shampoos, that was a G&D, and now it's the number one. I mean, tens of thousands of employees and all. There's so many different brands, and so they have 500 brands, and it's a huge company, L'Oreal, biggest. And so, but that's how it started. He understood every one of the L'Oreal is an amazing company because they've had so many successes. One of the reasons why L'Oreal has been so successful is because it's extremely entrepreneurial, and it has been that way for 120 years. Every time they create a product, it's not a new product. It's based on someone in the company being entrepreneurial and coming with an innovation that has a J&D, that has a meaning for a customer. So it's not the research and development people that found something great. It's they found the consumer with some problems and they bring a solution, and that solution is noticeably different. Any other question? Does that answer your comments?
I have a question, but it's just a really basic question.
That's fine.
For these startups that we're creating, how realistic can they be? Like, can we go all out just like as long as we pitch it in a very realistic and like researched way?
Yes, they can be. They. I mean, I think maybe the word that you want to use is not so the word realistic, because I think they have to be extremely realistic, but they can be very creative. Maybe
Yeah,
that's the
like
word you would want to use.
okay, like they
Right?
can be like radical or something like that. Oh,
You could be very, very creative. You could tell us about
okay.
something that doesn't exist, and that's fine as long as it's realistic. As long as people see. But you don't want to say that you're going to invent. Uh, um, uh, well,
Like if we were to like pitch like an app, that doesn't necessarily mean that one of us in the group has to be like a software developer, right?
no, exactly. So
Okay.
let me give you an example of this. Is let's say you imagine you're going to pitch an app, and the app is not in a cell phone, but it's a little chip that you're going to put in people's brain. And so
Mhm.
the app is going to be in people's brain. And then you're going to say, people lose their phone and they always look for their phone. There's no more looking for the phone. It's in your brain.
Mhm.
So that's a just noticeable difference. And people are tired of looking for things. And people, that way they can they don't need to use their hands. People are busy. So now it's in their brain. They just call the app.
Mhm.
Vanessa, okay, I want to listen to Drake. And then something in your head, Drake. And the app is in your head. The problem is, I think that's really cool, but it's unrealistic because um, I think the technology to develop that app, I love the idea. I think why not? We'll put it in people's brain. But technology doesn't exist, and it may be a while before we are able to implant things in people's brain in order for them to have interactivity between one another. So it's too futuristic, it's too creative, it's too unrealistic, but it's a
Mhm.
great idea. And there is opportunity to support it, but we're not going to really tell you to keep on going with this because it's a little bit too much Star Trek-y.
Like say for example, this is just an example, like
Yeah.
hypothetical. If we were to like pitch an idea for an app that is music industry relevant, would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Good.
Yeah. So you
Thank
can,
you.
you can do this. The only thing is when you do this is you have to be careful that there is enough of a market that it's not too much of a small thing.
Okay.
So now let's say you're saying something is realistic, something there is a market, but at the end of the day, when you're an investor, you don't want to invest. I remember there was a Shark Tank where this guy invented a piece of plastic that you would put on the top of a baby seat. And he showed, like, if you grab a baby seat and you lift it up, most people start getting uncomfortable after 3 minutes. But if you took this piece of plastic and then you put it on top of the baby seat and you pulled it, people started being comfortable after 8 minutes. So he said, you see, it's much more comfortable. The problem was that this piece of plastic was an additional accessory that people will always wonder where the heck it is. Oh, did I leave it in the trunk? Oh, which car did I leave it in the trunk? Oh, I think I put it in the bag. Which bag did I put it in? And so the sharks eventually said it's a great idea, but we can totally see people looking for this thing all over the place. So then they buy it, they use it once, and then they lose it, and then they just say, okay, it was great. And then in addition, it's a just noticeable difference between 3 minutes versus 8 minutes, sort of not really huge. They had a hard time being convinced. And so then this person said, yes, but if you are an older woman that has arthritis and you have bad strength in your arms and all this. And then they said, okay, but how big is that market of older lady that have arthritis and would have a hard time moving baby seats? And then the guy was like, well, I'm sure there's some people. And that's not an answer. So you have to make sure Nobody's going to invest something into something that they feel and they hear is not sizable and substantial, because they're going to say, I have too many choices. And therefore, I pick choices. I pick the one that I can see it's going to be 30%, 40% return on investment. Why would I pick something that is 5% return on investment? And where the investment is going to be very small. Investors are okay to invest a lot as long as the return is large and it's a large amount of return. So you have to think about this as well, is how stimulating is your project? So, that means there's a lot of things to take into consideration. And that's why you have to pick something that makes sense, something that you can create a platform around it in terms of having supporting evidences, something there is a market, something there is a problem. Like consumers, most consumers, you say, hey, Vanessa thought of creating this product, which is replacing this product, and what it's replacing, the J&D, is X, Y, and Z. What do you think? Wow, yeah, that's so much better. You're right. That's a good idea. I mean, look, I have a big pen here. Obviously, they've been existing for what, 60, 70 years? But whoever had the idea of putting a pen with multiple colors around it, this is great. Instead of looking for my red pen, I press on the red. If I want to change the color, I have a green and a blue. And if I need to keep it simple, there is the black. So that was a problem, having multiple pens. Now there is one. So that's what you want to find, something that simple, where it's very obvious that you're bringing a value, you bring just noticeable difference. So if someone asks you what it is to be an entrepreneur is someone that really, really, really understands the concept of J&D and is trying very, very hard to give the most, the optimize J&D. But you have to be careful. I was going to say the most. You don't want to give the most J&D the most as possible, because J&D is also against yourself. Whatever you do today that is good is going to make it hard to yourself the next time. So you want to have enough difference to your competitors and have enough difference also so you can succeed and already work on the next J&D of your own product, so you make it obsolete, and then you can keep growing. Any questions? Thank you for your questions, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, so just as a review again, is this so we're talking about the consumer, and the consumer is someone that is sort of very finicky because some people buy just for the sake of buying. It's actually a psychological issue. It's compulsive purchaser. So compulsive purchaser is someone that has to buy something every day, every hour, every month, and they feel alive because they are buying. So it has to do with materialism, it has to do with ego and vanity and all this. So that's a psychological problem, and it exists. But that's a minority. The majority of people, they won't buy something unless they have to. So your job as an entrepreneur is to create something new that is better and let people know. The issue here is the need recognition. Is people, when exposed to something new, they have to see if it changes that much, if they care for that change. So the J&D need to be meaningful for someone. That change is enough for people to see a change and for them to act on it. Meaning that suddenly they go, oh yeah, this is better. I can see how much better it is, and I can see that I want it now because it has enough improvements that I feel like I want it. So from this situation, either they buy or they look for information. So we see now they have access from their phone, from their computer, from whatever you want. They look for information. They can even still go to the store. They can download a brochure. They can even ask someone, like a family member, a friend, what do they think about it? And they collect this information. From this information, they make a purchase, or they decide to go try the variety of choices. And then they try samples, or they get just a short-term trial, or they get to try the product in full while at the store and so forth. And then that's the last stage, they buy or they decide not to buy. And when they buy the product, they, at that moment, they essentially experience the value. And then when they use the product, at that moment, they experience the satisfaction. Okay. So some entrepreneurs don't even know all the things I just told you right now, the terms, but they understand the process. For them, it's almost like common sense. It's just the word, remembering the word for the stages, but the stages make total sense. So that's always better if you're someone that sort of heard what I just said and you say, yeah, that makes sense. I see how people flow through the process of wanting to buy anything. This is important too, because you have to think about the various people and where do they fit in the cycle, in the timing of the consumption. So in the timing of the consumption, you have some people that are more early buyers and some people that are late buyers. So the early buyers are called the innovators, and they are very, very important when you're creating a new product, and they are extremely important when you have a startup. So this is my little tip for everyone. You need to talk about J&D, and you need to talk about the innovators. The first group of people that you're going to start, they're going to be sort of the influencers that are going to influence the rest of the people in buying your product. So the rule of thumb is that there's 2.5%. However, it depends on which industry, it depends which year and which country, which state. I mean, this number is not the same number for every situation of every innovators. It's just to give you a scale. So it's a small percentage. The innovators sometimes are people that just buy what's new, and it's just the way they are because they just feel that newer is better, or they feel like being the first one to buy something make them feel and look better. There's some people, they are the innovators because they have more discretionary income, so they can spend more, and therefore they are by definition innovators because they just can afford the most expensive things, which are by definition, since they're innovations, they tend to be better, so they buy the best and they can afford the best. There is innovators, also people that are true connoisseurs, people that are knowledgeable, they are fans, it's part of their hobby, it's a center of their life, maybe it's their subculture, and they innovate because that's a category that really interests them. So in the music, you would have innovators, people knowing a specific genre of music and really following that genre and learning about the new singers and the new albums and all this. So it is very, very important when you have a startup to not underestimate innovators, and in fact, to really understand who they are. But the most important thing is not to sell to innovators, but to sell to innovators so they stimulate the early adopters. So the early adopters are in fact much more important than the innovators, the early adopters. So let me look at something very quick. I want to show you this video. So this is a 2-minute video, a little bit more than 2 minutes, and you will see it's a very simple, almost child-like explanation of how people are when it comes to look at innovators and early adopters and so forth. So yes, I wanted to show you this video because when I show you this graph, you may not be very inspired. It's like, what is the professor trying to talk about? The innovators, the early adopters, the movement. But now that you've seen this video, I think you understand my point, which is that when you're a startup, you have to create the movement, but you're not creating the movement for you, you're creating the movement for people. And therefore you have to find those innovators, you have to find those influencers, you have to find those early adopters. And it's once you can transmit from the influencers, the innovators, to the early adopters that you have a movement that is born. And so why would people care? People will care because they can see that there is a benefit. People will care because they can see that it's public and it's better and it's what is expected from them. People are into herds, people are into the norm, people are into following standard. So you have to have this J&D that becomes sort of the standard and be recognized as the standard. And it's this fake it, make it that gets them to actually embrace your movement and then earn and feel like they own that movement and they want to be part of it because they're creating it. Interesting. Any questions?
I got a question. Um, I mean, I guess the most I'm wondering if you have any examples. I think a great example is Bitcoin, but do you have any like within the corporate kind of like company world that you can think of?
Well, every successful, I mean, you can start with Nike. You know, you can start with Nike. You can start with the Apple iPhone. Every successful product went through this process. I was talking about L'Oreal. I mean, L'Oreal, it's one of the largest company in the world, and he started in his kitchen. One man in his kitchen, and eventually he's the second person with his wife, and then he was the third, and so it's all about really setting a standard, and that's why you have a marketing method which is called guerrilla marketing. Guerrilla marketing is sort of a vitamin, a booster for creating movement by sort of creating fake followers, where the followers would be your own creation. You would actually pay for people to be following you and hope that these followers will generate genuine followers. So guerrilla marketing is that you have to surprise people. You have to create a situation where people are believing that this is what's expected from them. And so the world we live in is almost only made of this. And when people think that they make decisions themselves, I think they are wrong. Most of the decisions are dictated by the environment. Very few people do certain things that they've decided. And they may be doing it something that is different than everybody else, but eventually they feel the society pressure to do what everybody else is doing and not to be a part. We're sort of programmed to be very social. We're sort of programmed to follow. And very few people are programmed to lead. And so because I teach business, because I teach marketing and I teach entrepreneurship, I essentially tell you that not to be a follower, to be someone who is an epistemologist, where you worry about facts and you worry about what you think is right. But I also want you to be someone that manipulates and controls facts for your own benefits. And sometimes you have to kind of give extra vitamins to your startup for people to follow it. So in my industry, one way you do this is you go to wine and spirits competition, because there's some people that are wine and spirit reviewers, and they will give you a rating, they will give you a medal, and then you use that medal to tell people, I got a gold medal. And this gold medal is essentially something that you're using as saying it's okay, it's safe, it's highly regarded by experts. Therefore, you can follow, you can trust experts, right? So that's an example, trusting experts. Any other questions?
Professor, I'm just curious with laggards, or is there a way to convert them to being the late majority?
So
I don't know if I confused you, but
we don't
what I'm
hear you
asking.
well. But,
Oh, you don't. Uh-oh. I'm
so,
sorry. I'll just ask you later. I apologize.
no. So I think you said, how did you get people to the late majority? I think that, I don't know if that's what you said. I think I heard that.
I think he said he's wanting to know if you can go from a laggard to like the late majority.
Yeah, to pretty much transition a person or a group.
So from a laggard to a late majority?
Or just any type of transition, because they're lagging, so to make them a part of the adopter group that's not lagging. That's
Well,
the best I can.
Yeah. So the laggards are people that they're not going to go to become the late majority, because the laggards are the last group after the late majority. So the flow only goes one way. But if what you're asking, what's the tipping point between late majority and laggards? It's essentially when the product is not anymore a product that is seen as having any J&D, meaning it becomes an obsolete product. It becomes a product that is not doesn't have any growth anymore within nobody. So nobody is seeking the product, and therefore it becomes, laggards. There are some situations where products go through these cycles and then they become back again sort of to a group of innovators, because there's product revival as well. So product revival is where you would bring back a candy. There's like a candy people always loved, and it became this very successful candy, and then it disappeared. And then someone brings back this candy, and then this candy becomes trendy again. Or roller skates. So roller skates, very trendy, then it's rollerblade, and then rollerblade goes up, roller skates go down. And eventually it's only the laggards that buy the roller skate. And then someone comes up with a roller skate with titanium and Kevlar and all of this. So it's the same design as 50 years ago, but with new materials. And then there's a bunch of people that say, oh, I want roller skates again. And so the roller skate comes back. So that's what happened to the vinyl disc. See, the vinyl disc went to the laggards, and then the vinyl disc got revived, and now it's seen as a innovative product. So they have different ways of making the plastic bigger and different colors, things couldn't see before, and new compilation and all of this. So you can revive products, but if you revive it from being a product that was only within the laggards, maybe you change country. It's a laggards in the US, but maybe it's a different stage in a different country. So that's the variation that you can do. But you don't go from laggards to late majority. It doesn't go back from the right side to the left side. It has to be recycled through. So
can I ask a question about this graph? What would you say would be like a timeline for like over the span of how many years would this like graph go into place?
Well,
it just depends on the company.
Well, it depends on the market.
Okay.
It depends on the market, because some products, there's some brands that last longer.
Yeah.
So for example, if you say Mercedes would have a longer span than a Hyundai, for example. So the Hyundai will go to a faster through these 5 different stages, versus the Mercedes won't. So some brands have longer stages, but some product category have longer stages, and some country have longer stages. So in general, Japan has shorter stages than the US, and the US has shorter stages than in Europe in general. But again, it depends for what. So, and you know, even think about the music, you know, song. And a song maybe 10 years ago, maybe lasted 6 months. Now it's a month and a half. So those things, there's no one rule fits all. It's all very dependent. And then it's also very dependent of the J&D that you had. If the J&D that you had was easily copied, it's going to speed up the process. But if the just noticeable difference you had was a patent, a utility patent, therefore it's going to be a longer span. So yeah, you could say that design patent shorter, utility patent longer. Thank you for this question. But there's no one thing that fits everything. Unfortunately, that would be too nice. But the world is way more complex than that. That's why everybody has their chance, because it's complicated. So I won't go into the detail of this, but the idea here is that there's a product life cycle that products go through. The product life cycle is made of before introducing the product, the growth, the maturity, and the decline. In these different stages of the product, the idea here is that you want to see the overlap between what the product stages are of its cycle and the cycle of the consumers, and the fact that there's an overlap between the consumer stages and the product stages, but at the same time that there's a different objectives depending on the cycle, and there's different strategies depending on the cycle. The idea is that there's different product launched at different times, and the idea is that you have to renew your product portfolio in order to create sustainability for your brand. The idea is at the beginning, you focus on getting people to know about the product. That's the introduction. At the growth stage, you try to maximize your share. At the maturity, you maximize your profit. And then in the decline, where your product is in the late majority, is you try to essentially reduce your expenses and maximize your return. Again, when you have multiple products in a company, so this does not pertain for a startup, because a startup doesn't have multiple products that they have launched. They are about to launch, but these pertain for being an entrepreneurial enterprise, where you have constantly you're constantly working on new innovation in order to bring improvements in your market. In that situation, you have multiple products, and you're going to look at these products in terms of where do they fit in the market, in terms of how much share do we have and how much growth do we have. And so there you're going to have the stars, the question mark, the cash cow, and the dogs. And depending on where these fit, you will make decisions. When you look at these products, you're also looking at your competitors' product, because they have different shares and they have different product being implemented with different level of noticeable difference as well, because their innovation may be more recent than new innovation, so therefore they are ahead of the game. So your competitors, who are they? What are their strengths and weaknesses? You're doing the benchmarking. What are the strategies they're using? Who are they focusing on? The target? What is their image and positioning? What are their prices? What are their potential margins? So it's hard to calculate your competitor's margin. You're never going to be 100% sure that you know what their margins are, but you want to do this just so to see if you're not too far away from their margins to your margins. You want to, yes,
You talking about operating margin?
yes,
So like, what is it? Revenue minus like their operating expenses, and then like you divide that to see what percentage it is of the revenue.
yes. So you're looking to see, you know, like in each industry, there is like a operating margins and product cost margins for profit. So you're just checking the two things. Is like, are we running a business where we have too many expenses, and you try to reduce the expenses. Try to reduce the expenses by having less employees, maybe some of the tasks are outside of the company. Then you look at the cost of goods, and then you look at the cost of selling the product and shipping. And you're looking at all of these because you want to make sure that you don't have too many expenses that you could reduce and where they don't bring any value, any quality to the end product. So, and you know, you have to be careful because if you, this I've had a lot of experiences, because when you do this, myself as a marketer, I'm oftentimes not the best person for doing this exercise. The best person for doing this exercise will be the accountant. However, when the accountant does this, the accountant is the worst person, oftentimes, I don't want to insult everyone, but that's my experience, in thinking about the customer. So when you run a business, I think the customer is the king and their satisfaction is number one. But at the same time, there's expenses that are very important in order to satisfy the customers, but they are to quantify. And therefore, the accountants are going to see these as frivolous expenses. So the typical thing is sometimes you have to give extra services to your customers. It's like normally you have rules in the company where you say, you know, we only deliver one pallet, and orders smaller than one pallet, there's extra costs to be delivered. So this decision is an accountant decision, but it's not really a customer-oriented decision, because what if the customer keeps buying the same product and then one day he's sort of thinking of buying an additional product, but he doesn't want, or she doesn't want to buy a full pallet because they sort of want to try it out. The accountant is going to say, no, the rule is one pallet, or if it's less than one pallet, they have to pay extra. But the marketing person is going to have really to see that the money that the reduction of margin that you're going to make in biting the cost of the extra shipping for having a smaller quantity being shipped is sort of the one-off, if not the only opportunity to start selling this product to the customer. Therefore, it's worth the smaller margins. But if the person who's in charge is very cost-oriented, they're going to say no, they have to obey by the rules. And if you think that you run a business where all the rules have to apply all the time, therefore you're missing on a lot of opportunities. So I tell you this because this is not something that happened to me once. This happened to me hundreds of times, because there are many business owners that are not really good entrepreneurs, and they are mostly managers. And the manager is someone that worries about the routine and the standards and the rules. And an entrepreneur worries about the end result, worries about the growth, worries about the satisfying their customers, worries about building longevity, worries about sales. Sales, even making less profit sales is still sales. And if you sell, you get more products outside. If you get more product outside, you get more people to try the product. And if more people trying the product, you have more chance of selling more products the next time. So it's different emphasis. But I think a business that is not focused on customer satisfaction and sales, and is more focused on understanding processes, is going to be more of a government than an entrepreneurial business anyway. So and then you worry about the trade leverage, so I'm going to talk about this later. And then you want to try to look at all of these across industries, across competitors. So here is a table. This presentation I'm showing you today is in Canvas. If you go in Canvas, you go in File, you go in Lecture, you're going to see Lecture 1, Professor Vigneron, Lecture 2, Professor Mackenzie, Lecture 3, Professor Vigneron. So it's downloadable. And why I'm saying that right now and not at the beginning, I forgot to say it. I thought maybe you knew, but I'm saying it really right now because the table that you see on your screen right now is extremely important. I hope you will all use this in your final presentation. I speak so highly of it, and I believe Brian is speaking so highly of it that eventually I think everybody has something similar to that. At the end, you should. This is a very simple way of explaining. Explaining what? What is this explaining? And I'll give you a tip. I must have said this word 30 times since the beginning today. And it starts with a J. After the J,
But they're just
the J and D. Yes,
just
exactly.
Just
exactly. So this is a very simple way of showing the J and D with your competitors, right? It shows what you do, it shows what they do, and it's when you make a presentation, try to use the least words as possible and the more images as possible. This image is doing multiple things at once. It tells you about the J&D, and it tells you about who are your competitors, and it tells you about what are the strengths and weaknesses of your competitors. It does all of this at once. Use it for your final presentation, please, and then use it again in your own life. It's very simple. You see this kind of presentation all the time. I mean, you're getting I don't know, an offer from AT&T or Verizon to change your cable. Open the brochure, open the email, open the whatever, you will see they oftentimes have one of these inside. Not only they have one of these inside between them and their competitors, but they usually have one of these inside between their different plans. They have plan A, plan B, and plan C. And what you get for plan A, what you get for plan B, what you get for plan C, right? Plan A, 1999, plan B, 59.99, and plan C, 99.99 for cell phone, for cable, or whatever you want to use, right? I mean, you've seen this many times in your life, but use it. This is a very powerful way of presenting it. Try to remember this. I mean, could you have this in your one sheet? You could go to strategy, most likely, and final startup report. I hope you will. But just remember, it's a one image says all. Do you have any questions? So think you are presenting to an investor. An investor, that's what they want to see.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit more about J&D and just noticeable difference and how that changes over time?
Well, it changes over time for multiple reasons. The number one reason is because your J&D is attacked by your competitors. The minute you have a J&D, your competitors learns about your J&D because you sort of informing your consumers about your J&D. So while you're informing your consumers of your J&D, your competitors are hearing about the J&D, and then they're thinking of considering adopting it too, or waiting to see how you're doing with it, or not going that direction, going into another direction. If they think that's a great idea and they adopt it right away, within a week or a year, you're going to have no more J&D because your competitors will have your J&D plus their J&D. And therefore, very soon, your J&D is not going to appear anymore because it's going to be taken as a standard, and it's going to be your competitors' J&D, which is their adoption plus their J&D, that's going to be the change. So what happens is once you have a J&D, you need to work on your next J&D, anticipating your competitors copying you and their J&D. So that's when it becomes tricky, is because you need to have a J&D that is superior to yours and superior to the one that you're guessing your competitor is going to have after they copy you.
I see. Thank you for clearing that up, because
yeah,
now I can see the importance of continually researching and also just retooling things as we go.
So your competitors are making it fast, changing the J&D. The consumer, not so much. But if, let's say, you are lucky and your competitors are slow to respond, eventually you're going to have to respond because your consumers are going to make you work on your J&D. Because the consumers, eventually they get used to what you're offering, and then they take it for granted, and therefore they don't buy as much because they're comfortable. Therefore, you need to create a new J&D also to stimulate your consumers to buy a new version of what you're offering, because this is what you see with all the software. Windows 98, Windows 2000, Windows 2003, Windows 2006, and that's what they do. I was actually thinking of Lance, who last week when we had class mentioned about the fact, I think it was last week or the week before, that he's about to change his computer because he had to change one software and then he had to change another one, and changing the software made the other software not work anymore, and all this happened to my daughter just a few days ago. There was something not working. We went to the Apple store, to the Genius bar, and the Genius bar said, oh, you have to change that software. So we changed that software. Then we came back home, and 2 days after, she found out that that update that she did is screwing up other things in the computer that doesn't work anymore. What I think they're trying to do is eventually for her to change her computer.
M-chip, that's what they want.
That's what they want, M-chip, exactly. That's what they want, M-chip. So M-chip is a just noticeable difference that they have created for making our life harder, but also, so it's both. You see, it's competitor and it's themselves. They don't want people to buy a Apple and say, wow, these are great, I'm going to sit on it for 12 years. No, they don't want that.
Phase out the Intel. Phase out the
exactly.
So then I would say then primary research from your customers and their biggest complaints is your primary source of your J&D as time goes on.
Yeah. Exactly. Find a problem.
Cool.
Find
Thank
their
you
problem.
for clearing that up.
Yeah, find their problem. If you do this for this class and you find a problem and you're solving this problem by offering a solution to a problem that you've identified doing research, it's going to be so easy to do this project. Piece of cake. If you understand this principle and you apply it every time, you will be successful. It's almost certain you will be successful. Almost certain. 98% chance. 95% chance. Solve problems. You're an entrepreneur, you're a doer of problem solving. And they are not problems that you've invented, it's problems that you have supporting existing facts, evidences, opportunities that are sizable, realistic, with resources that can be done. Remember, I read your plan for the pitch that you are doing as an investor, Tamer. Remember that, the one that you gave me maybe a month and a half ago? And I told you one of the big problems is you need a lot of resources. So that's sometimes a problem. There's an opportunity, there's a J&D, there's all of these things. But in order to implement it, you're going to need someone to give you a significant amount of money in order to be successful. And that's sometimes what makes a startup fail, is because it's a great idea, it's supported by opportunities, but that's an expensive adventure. And then you never find the money because this was a lot of money. And and someone else is going to do it 1 year after you thought about it and all of this, and you go, how did they think about it? Well, people right now are thinking of ideas that other people are thinking too, and not everybody gets to the same point. Not even cheating or copying each other. It's just the fact that we all see the world we live in, and we all see that problems, and there's a lot of people with an entrepreneurial instinct, and they get it. But then who has the resources, who has the passion, is what makes a difference. Okay.
Okay, I see. It's really interesting.
So here we have, therefore, what is this slide? This slide is because I want you to think, this is complicated to some extent. It's the idea that you have objectives that lead to strategies and strategies that lead to tactics. and tactics go into the strategy, and the strategy goes into the objective. So you have to really understand that, and the process, the direction. And so you have to understand what's a big activity and what's a small activity, and where do they fit. You have to understand that it's okay to think about tactics and then go backwards and think about the strategy, and then go backwards and think of the opportunities. It's okay to create it this way, but it's wrong if you are presenting it in the wrong orders. So what are the different strategies? So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, because you can study them again on your own time, but you have the basic generic strategies. So what strategy should you talk about when you're pitching your startup? There's one that covers 70% of the situation: market penetration, product development, market development, diversification. You need to know this. New product development is one of the most complicated. If you are doing a new product development strategy, you need to think about the 8 stages of new product development. Okay, so now let's look at another video, which I think is very inspirational. It's not a recent video. The point I was trying to make here is, if you are an entrepreneur, you're someone, therefore, who embrace the concept of being a leader, and embrace the concept of taking charge, embrace the concept of doing something that appears as going against maybe the grain at the beginning, but eventually people are going to forget and think that becomes the norm. I tell you something very funny. When I went to school, junior school, in the early 80s, I had a back problem, and my parents said, you know, you're going to have to use a backpack. It may not appear to you as being different, because now everybody uses a backpack, but this was maybe in 1980 or 1979. I went to school with a backpack. In the school, I was the only one with the backpack. There was nobody else with the backpack. And in fact, to buy a backpack, the only way in France was to go to a mountain store, a store where they were selling accessories for climbing. So obviously, the only color of backpack that was offered was bright red, because that was a safety color. If you climb the mountain and you get lost, you use your backpack to be seen, and so forth. So imagine this kid. So I was 9 years old or 8 years old. I was a small kid going to school with a backpack, and obviously, because it was a mountain backpack, that backpack was huge, because there was no choices of sizes beside big. So I had a huge backpack, a huge red backpack. And when you go to school, you know what the kids do is they give everyone a name, you know, and I ended up being called Backpack. That was my name at school, in that small school. And so I was wearing that backpack, and eventually I was very happy to wear my backpack, because what was the other people wearing? This was a long time ago, but they were wearing just a one bag that you carry on the side. It looks like a satchel, like a luggage, a piece of luggage. And they would wear it, and they would be like this going to school, and I would be going like this, that go to school straight. So eventually someone saw me, and another one saw me, and then 2 or 3 years down the road, half of the school was wearing a backpack. So nobody called me Backpack anymore, because I was the same as everybody else. So being a misfit is okay, because that's the job of a leader. Being a misfit is okay, because that's the job of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone that constantly supplies solutions to problems, and therefore they're going against the grain. Some people, they go against the grain for a very short time, because it's quickly embraced, and sometimes it takes a longer time. But you have to know when it's time to give up sometimes. I don't know if you remember this video of this US Marine veteran that was spending all of his money, including the university funds for his kids, you know, doing something, and the Shark Tank people told him they should stop, and eventually he went into bankruptcy and all of this. And so you have to know when to stop, but you can't stop too easily. So that's the concept of the crazy ones. The crazy one is the think different. The think different is the just noticeable difference, but you want it to be meaningful. So once you find your opportunities, once you find your customers, when you're clear about what do they want, when you're clear about the problems that they have, then you work on your strategy. So there's the 4 basic strategies. There's also the competitive strategies. So you have them here. There's also the value strategies that you have here, and they're part of what we discussed in the past. There's other strategies such as market leader, challenger, follower, market nicher. So I used this example, the leader being Apple, the challenger, challenging the leader is Samsung, the market follower is Huawei, so you may not know it because it's illegal in the US, but Huawei is one of the largest phone company in the world, it's Chinese. And then the market nicher is I put Blue. Blue is a brand of cell phone for people that are retired. They only focus on older people. So it's like a senior cell phone. So that would be appropriate. So the 4 Ps is what follows the understanding of the strategies. The 4 Ps is understanding that there's competitors, but there's always something that can be made. If you look at the cola industry, it's already all exists. How could you have a just noticeable difference? There's one company that came with a just noticeable difference. It's called Meca-Cola. Meca-Cola is a Coca-Cola for Muslims. So there's a number of Muslims that, like every country, there's people that like people and people that don't like people. So there's a number of Muslims that are against the American culture, but yet they want to drink a cola, and therefore they will have to sort of to drink a Pepsi or a Coca. And so some smart entrepreneur created a just noticeable difference, which is it's the Muslim cola and it's using the name Meca-Cola. Obviously, you would have to be Muslim to do that. Otherwise, you probably would get in trouble by using just the term Mecca, which is a sanctified area for the Muslims. He started this business, and this business became extremely successful very quickly in the Middle East, but also in Northern African country and so forth. But here's another one. This is a cola that is made in an area, like a region of France, where they have a subculture where they are Celtic, like Celts people, like Scottish or Welsh or Irish. It's a specific subculture. And so in France, we have an area called Brittany. And those people in Brittany, they have their own subculture. So they made a Coca-Cola for Brittany. And I tell you what, this is not insignificant. If you go in Brittany, in the area which is north west of France, and you go to any supermarket, you will find some Coca-Cola, but in small quantity. And most of what you will find are the local cola. So it's like the local culture of cola. So it's possible to succeed and compete and reinvent yourself and be a misfit in pretty much any industry. But there is like a code that you have to break. There is a formula that you have to create. And this formula is very simple. Is what that's I think Tamer mentioned that earlier today, is what do the customer want? What do the customers wish they had that they don't have? And therefore it becomes your job to give them what they want. So I was telling you about the fact that there are opportunities everywhere. And I think also that's the idea when you're an entrepreneur, there's no reason, there's no industry, there's no market, there's no time where there's less that can be done. There's always something, there's always an opportunity. And it's looking for these opportunities is what you do. So the assessment of the market size, it's the time sum, where you will look at the total available market. So it's the total number of customers that are in this buying this product. The SAM is the serviceable available market, which is the reachable area that you could be servicing. And then the serviceable obtainable market, it's this SAM multiplied by the penetration rate. So the only difficult thing, I mean, not only, but the most difficult thing is to identify this penetration rate. So the penetration rate is what seems feasible. What's the likely percentage that your startup could capture the first year? So these numbers are smaller, the the less resources. So oftentimes for a startup, it becomes small because of that. It's smaller based on the larger the number of competitors becomes smaller because there's already competitors having market share, and it becomes bigger depending on the just noticeable difference that you have. So if the J&D is smaller, you also will have a smaller penetration rate. But if your innovation is truly a change, I mean, like imagine the change that PayPal had when they launched their services. It was something that would apply to a lot of people, and therefore that would be something that is easy to learn how to use. It's convenient, and it's not very expensive. So that would make a penetration rate higher than a new service that is complicated to use and that is expensive. So penetration rate, there's no formula to create the penetration rate. It's based on your guess estimation, based on some deduction, looking at what has happened in the past, making analogies between different factors. And so you have to create the argument for the penetration rate. So here, the arguments for the time sum are straightforward, but for the sum, most of the energy needs to be spent on explaining what makes you believe that this number, this 2%, 3% is likely to happen in the first year. The problem is with a small percentage, you end up with a small number of sales and possibly a small amount of profits because there's a lot of expenses that have to be done launching your company. So the problem with that is it's not very attractive for an investor. So small penetration rate, less attractive for an investor. Big penetration rate, more interesting for an investor, but it requires more expenses and therefore larger investment from the investor, and therefore more argument to sort of convince anyone that the likelihood of all of this happening. So here's an example. This was for the mental health services clinic that students had offered a few years ago, where they were saying that there's a lot of mental health in the music industry, and there were no clinic specialized in providing mental health for celebrities. So celebrities would go in some certain clinics that would have mental health services, and then they would get a VIP service. But there was not such a thing as a clinic that would be doing just VIP services. So what is the size of the market? By hearing the ID, it sounds really small. Well, let's look at the TAM. So the total number of working musicians, 40,000. The total number of musicians working in the area of the Southwest is 7,200. And then the number of people that would, where we would have a 12% penetration rate. So we see that's a large percent penetration rate. So there's going to be a lot of explanation on how one would get such a large percentage. And that's the next explanation is based on the fact that you would have the clinic, for example, be supported by several celebrities. So the investor would be themselves celebrities, and therefore they would advertise the services of the clinic that they have created as celebrities, serving celebrities, and therefore you could expect, based on these celebrities, that the percentage of penetration rate would be very high. So the pitch that the students would plan would be not just for a random investor or wealthy investor, but for an investor being a celebrity themselves, which would be part of the marketing push in order to get access. Now, cassette tape. You could do the same thing for cassette tape, the people listening to music, the people buying physical music, and then the percentage penetration rate for cassette tape. So here the percentage is very small, 1%. So your penetration rate of 1% is for the first year. It doesn't have to be 1% for every year. It could be bigger the first 3 years and then become smaller, or it could be much smaller the first 3 years and then become bigger. There's no rule of thumb. It's just a question of what is your plan and what is your argument and deduction for this. So these slides follow the whole concept that if you have strategies, these strategies are followed by sub-strategies. So that's the strategies for the 4Ps, which are followed by tactics. In other words, so that was the image, this is the word, is you have 1, the plan, and 2, the 4Ps. Inside the plan, you have the objectives and the corporate strategies. So these are the 4 basic corporate strategies. They are not the only corporate strategies, because if you go back earlier, is had operational excellence, had the focus strategies, there's several of them, and they are listed in the slide just above. So there's more than just 4. But then there's 4Ps, that doesn't change, although I will show you later that sometimes there's more than 4, but the most standardized format is 4Ps. And inside the 4Ps, then you would have the P objectives, and then you would have the sub-strategies. So the sub-strategies for product is a sub-strategy of the definition of quality, how much quality you want to have, the branding strategy, the amount of service strategy, the packaging strategy. For the price, is you will have as sub-strategies scheming, penetration, captive, and bundling. For place, you would have direct distribution, indirect, exclusive, intensive, selective, hybrid. And for promotion, the strategy at the P level will be multi-channel, social media, sales force, sales promotion, and direct marketing. Then these will be followed by the tactics. So what's important to understand is the ranking of all of this. You have the umbrella objectives, which are fulfilled by the high-level strategies. And then these go into the 4Ps, and each P has its own strategy, own objective, which are fulfilled by its own tactics. So this is important to understand it. My perspective with students is try to do the best you can to organize this in a fashion that it goes from the broader to the more specific, understanding objectives, strategies, 4Ps, objectives, sub-strategies, and tactics. Do the best you can. But eventually, this is something that you want to master as you develop your own career, as you develop yourself as a business person, where you understand the funnel aspect of things, where there's bigger and smaller, and they need to fit into one another. When you're talking about your portfolio, your product portfolio, you have to think about the width and the depth, how many variations of product you have, and in the product mix, you will have the notion of upstretch, downstretch. Using the brand, you would have the notion of brand equity. So when you talk about creating your brand and growing your brand, you have to think about the influencers, the innovators. You have to think about gaining brand awareness, introducing your brand. You have to think about the positioning of your brand in terms of the meaning and associations, but at the same time in terms of the overall quality that you want to offer. But more important than everything else is the long-term building of your brand, is to think about the brand loyalty. Who are the people you want to become fan, that you want to cultivate a relationship with, so they stay buying your product and they reduce your marketing costs, but at the same time, they give you trade leverage. So what is this concept of trade leverage? Is the fact that the trade will support you if your brand is supported by consumers. It's a little bit like if you want to be a top model, you cannot just be someone attractive. You also have to have lots of people following you in social media. That's a new aspect. Very attractive person, no social media, will get less opportunity than a less attractive person with lots of social media followers. So it's the same. A brand that has lots of brand loyalty will get more support from the channel of distribution, because the channel of distribution, for the most part, is not selling your product, it's just distributing your product. They are not actively involved in selling your product. The distribution network is sort of lazy, and they do what's easier, and what's easier is what the consumer wants. So brand loyalty is very important because it allows you to do this. So I was talking about the 4 Ps: product, place, promotion, and price. And there's also something called the 6 Ps. So I'm not trying to add more to your basket. I won't spend too much time on this, but I wanted to bring it up because the most 95% of the people talk about the 4 Ps, and there's 5% of the people that talk about the 6 Ps. So it's the second most famous, but it's not as dominant. The 6 Ps is usually more discussed if you're a service. So there's still product, place, price, and promotion, but there's also people and process. So if you are a service, you have the definition of being intangible, variable, heter heterogeneous. You have many different characteristics like that. And therefore, to deal with a service, meaning someone selling concert tickets, someone selling airlines, hotels, restaurants, entertainment, and all of this is in the service. So many of you will be in the service. Therefore, you talk about the 6 Ps. So process, the additional P, means that you will have to have a mix, another P mix, for organizing how the product is being produced. What are the stages in producing it? So stage 1, you welcome people. Stage 2 is you ask them if they need help. If they say yes, you ask them what help do they need. If they say no, is you tell them don't hesitate to ask if you need help. Then you give them maybe some direction of, there is processes and services, and so you have to create it. If you have a restaurant, you want processes. Who's in charge of cleaning? Who's in charge of serving? Who's in charge of cooking? Who's in charge of ordering? There's processes. You know, when you go to the restaurant, there's this person that comes and say, I'm going to take care of you on drinks. Oh, can I order the food? No, it's not me, it's someone else. Because they have processes in order to minimize, say, service failures. So whenever you deal with services, you have to think about the process. Then 2, whenever you have services, you have to think about who is making the services, because you want to minimize also variability between the different service satisfaction due to the fact that people are not being selected and they are not being trained. So the 6 Ps, when it comes to people, is you thinking about how do we hire people, how do we train people, how do we motivate people, how do we keep people, how do we promote people, and all of this in order to, because the people are like the machine in a good. When you're making goods like pens and pencils and cars and tires and shampoo, the product is made by machines versus for services is made by people. So you have to think about these people and their activities and their impact on the satisfaction of the consumers more than you would for goods. Okay, so I don't expand on this. I just wanted to bring it up for your own knowledge. So the 4 Ps, inside the 4 P, each one of these has its own. So inside the product, you have the product mix. Inside the place, you have the place mix. Price, you have the price mix. Oh, I have 2 places here. Sorry about that. And then inside promotion, you have the promotion mix. The promotion mix, as an example, has multiple activities inside. These activities could have their own objective and could have their own sub-strategies, which will have their own tactics. So you have to be sort of very militaristic when you think about implementing your plans by having all of these different characteristics and functionalities being represented. So I honestly did not go into all that details when we came to working on Alex Ritchie, all the details of what needed to be covered, because I was more interested in teaching you, knowing that I was going to teach you again after, and you are going to get entrepreneurship. So I was not like trying to get, exhaust you to death to the point that you probably hate the class and hate the subject. I'm sort of playing on the long run between the two classes. So this class now, it's expected from you that you go into more details for your enterprise in thinking about the sub strategies, thinking about the product mix, the promotional mix, what you're going to do, and again think about the budget. So all of you have done it in the previous class, but this time you will do it again. But we expect you do it a little bit. You bring more details and more realistic details. And how is that going to come from you naturally? Is by doing the one sheet, the go-to strategy, and then the final paper. This is what you're going to be is coached to bring more and more details within the 3 stages of developing your plan for your startup. It's going to come naturally. So another strategy here, which is just a communication mix strategy, pull and push, and this one is inside the table I just showed before. So there's a number of strategies that you can use. Now, why so many products fail? Many products fail because people have a lack of experience, because they didn't estimate what they needed to do. They didn't focus on the problem, they essentially focused on the ideas. So it's like solution versus ideas. They failed because they didn't define who was their target. Remember, when you talk about target, you have undifferentiated, differentiated, and concentrated. It's not only you need to do segmentation targeting and explain what are the characteristics of your customers, and because you have a startup, that's why the innovators is so important. Because you have to tell us who is the innovator. Why do you think this is going to be the first group of people consuming this product? And why do you want this group to be the first one to consume? The analogy I'm going to do right now is an analogy that I've been doing all my career since 1995. Unfortunately, it's not a very gracious analogy right now because we're still through some pandemic, but the concept of pandemic is very appropriate in business. So when you are a business and you have a startup, you have to create this movement, and this movement, you have to think about it as a virus that you want to spread, right? That's why I say it's not very gracious, my analogy right now, but it's helpful for you to understand. This virus that you have to identify who is the person that's going to get it first and be the sickest out of it and transmit the most. So you have to think, I mean, if I take the example of the coronavirus, you're not going to want to give the coronavirus to someone who is young and healthy, because the virus is not going to be contagious. So you're going to look for someone maybe that is older, maybe that has diabetes, maybe that is a little overweight, something like this. Because that's why it's going to make the biggest bang for your buck. So when you have a startup and you're creating a solution to a problem, even if your solution, from your research, from common sense, that it's not just 10% of the population that's going to want it, 40% of the population is going to want it, you cannot capture 40% from the get-go. So you have to think about who is it that's going to be the one that's going to catch it easier, want it easier, and spread it to other people easier, to create the spill over effect, the movement that we just saw before. So which I expect that you're going to come in front of us, you're going to say the target is so and so and so, then I'm going to say why. Oh yes, we have to say why. Why? Because they're young and because they're rich. Yeah, but why do you care that they're young and rich? Oh yes, because if they're young, they are more open to new things, and because they're rich, because we are 20% more expensive. And when you're young and rich, you take more pictures in fancy areas, and therefore something. You need to have an argument, not just for saying, this is the target. We don't care who's the target. It's the why, the reasoning of why this is the target and why you selected that target at the very beginning in order to spread the movement that we need to hear. So remember this, because that's a very important factor for entrepreneurs, is this skill in knowing who to talk to first, who to get customer first in order to get more for your communication than trying to go broad. Can entrepreneurs go broad? Of course. But the problem of going broad is you need huge amount of resources to go broad, because there's going to be a lot of waste at the beginning, because you're going to advertise everywhere. Only a few people are going to respond. And therefore, there's going to be a lot of wasted energy on advertising. But if you have huge means, this is the best way to do it and get faster results. But realistically, most startups don't have huge resources. Therefore, 99% of the situation, people have to be more like a sniper versus a shotgun, if you want. Businesses fail because they have no marketing plan. Businesses fail because they mis-evaluated the GND, the satisfaction, the value, the competitor GND and satisfaction and value, because their positioning was not clear, because they can have, maybe they picked the wrong time, because they didn't budget well, they were too short on the budget, because they made forecasts that were unrealistic, because they were too tactical, or they were too strategic and not tactical, because they didn't have a vision and a mission, which means that they only had objectives, but they didn't think about the long-term growth of their company. That's why businesses fail. They fail because they didn't think that new product development had 8 stages, and those 8 stages mattered. So what's new product development? New product development is whatever I think the owner is good. Did you look at the strategy? Did you look at having multiple IDs and screening these IDs? Did you look at budgeting and production? Did you look at growth and scaling? Did you define multiple test methods and how you could commercialize the product? No, I just made a new product and I'm very excited about it. And let's see what happens. Well, too much luck is involved because they didn't have the stamina. So sometimes the stamina is hard when your business requires outside investors. Outside investors that are silent, are very focused on the return on investment. How much you're spending, how much they invest, how much am I getting 2 months after, 6 months after, I don't get my money, I want my money. And that generates a lot of pressure because then you need to think short term. But to build your brand loyalty, it's long term and it's expensive. And if you're short term, you're just focusing on awareness, and therefore not so much the loyalty, is you just informing people or you're just giving discounts. But if you give discounts, you don't build your brand loyalty as much. Maybe you don't have partners or not enough partners or the wrong partners. Maybe you made mistakes because you didn't write any contracts, or you had contracts that were sort of drafts and they were never closed. Maybe you misunderstood pricing, you have poor communication. Maybe you're spending too much money on things that are not as necessary and it's overestimated. Maybe you underestimate the power of sales. So one thing that I've noticed is oftentimes the best businesses, the best startups have the best salespeople. But having the best salespeople is not enough. But it's very common that you see startups that fail because they had bad salespeople. Why would startup oftentimes have bad salespeople? That could be an open-ended question in your quiz 1. Why do they have bad salespeople, startups?
Because the product they're selling yet. So they don't know what they're selling?
Because they don't know what they're selling. No.
Like their STP isn't figured out completely, or they don't really understand what their product is. So their sales team doesn't exactly know how to sell it because they're not positioned correctly.
So yes, maybe. But imagine this. Imagine there's good salespeople and there's bad salespeople. If You give a company that has a bad explanation of the product to good salespeople, what happened?
It doesn't sell.
It works. Good salespeople are people that could sell ice to Eskimos, yeah. A good salesperson could sell crap to anyone. A good salesperson knows how to turn something that doesn't look good in something that looks good. Good salespeople, they look at the product and they figure what's the positioning. They figure what to say. They know how to make it work. Good salespeople. So now I'm saying, why is most of the time startup having bad salespeople? Which means that it's not like the salespeople are not able to sell because the company sucks. Is they are just bad salespeople? And the answer is very simple.
They don't have the money to buy. Like itself.
Yeah, that's the answer.
Because good sales
Don't have good employees. They don't have money to hire good employees.
Exactly. Who's the most well-paid person in a business? The salespeople. So then you're going to say, what about the owner? Sometimes the owner, but most of the time, the salespeople. So the salespeople, I'm not talking about the one that grabs the phone and calls 1,000 people a day and gets 980 no's. These people don't make a lot of money. If you go look for a consulting firm, for example, the people that makes the most money are the people on last floor. They never do photocopy. They have several secretaries. All the work is done for them. And most of what they do every day is go to lunch and go to dinner and play golf. And you go, what? They are the people that make more money? Yeah, but they make the sales. What do you mean sales? They play golf. No. They play golf with another rich person and they're negotiating 20 million sale. And then this 20 millions is pushed down the ladder to the people underneath that are going to take care of it. So good salespeople are required for startups, but good salespeople cost the most money. That's usually one of, if not the most expensive thing in a startup is getting good salespeople. Therefore, good salespeople are not in startups. Sometimes they are because the owner, she used to be a good salesperson and she had the idea and she was tired of her job and she was dreaming of a job where she would make even more money. And therefore she said, you know what, I'm going to do my business and I'm a good salesperson. I did a marketing degree. I understand the customer. I understand all of this. I think I can organize that. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to take charge of my life. I'm a good salesperson. Then they do well. But what the problem is this person is so busy managing because there's still little money that she doesn't sell that much, or she doesn't have time to do 24/7 selling because there's so many other things that she needs to do that she only spends 1 hour a day selling, and that's too little. Therefore, she needs to hire good salespeople. That's all they're going to do. But she doesn't have the money. So that's the catch-22. Is the best money is invested in salespeople, but that's oftentimes where they don't. Okay, so that's an important one. In underestimating the importance of sales and salespeople. Thinking doing research is a luxury. So they just do it. It's like, let me do it quick. I'm going to really bypass that. Overconfidence, and then they just don't understand that the consumer have a language and you need to speak the language of the consumers. How do you reduce marketing costs? The number one way is word of mouth. You set goals, you use brokers because brokers are salespeople. You can reduce a lot your costs. You do pull and push promotion. You use your brand equity. You grow your brand equity. You grow your brand loyalty, which is going to give you more trade leverage. You concentrate your targets, which means you have less targets, because the most expensive way is when you have one product, one target. That's differentiated. It's the most effective way, but it's the most expensive way. So you can usually do that when you're a bigger company. When you're a smaller company, you only do one product, one customer, and you quickly try to have multiple other products, but not too many. And then you grow into concentrating your customers in order to reduce the cost because you have growing number of customers per product that you're selling. You can also try to do downstretch because now you have a reputation and then you can use this reputation in order to sell another product. Snap-on is a brand that sells tools for mechanics. And then you may say, well, they created Blue Point, which is a sub-brand of Snap-on that they don't advertise that much. It's just a little bit cheaper than Snap-on, and it's sold by Snap-on. So when you go, oh, can I buy that tool from Snap-on? Yeah, you can. It's $150. $150? Why? Well, we have the Blue Point, which is 75, but that one is not advertised as much. All the advertising goes to Snap-on, And so therefore you're getting it from Snap-on with the service of Snap-on, but without the marketing expenses of creating the brand Snap-on. It's a non-marketed brand. It just lives under Snap-on. When you buy a perfume, 80% of the perfume is marketing, is branding, is advertising. So then you could go, you know what? I love this perfume. I don't need to pay $100 for this perfume. I'll be totally happy to pay $20. Then we call Yves Saint Laurent and ask them, do they have the $20 opium? Chanel, do they have the $20 number 5? And they're going to tell you, no, we don't. But you say, well, yeah, but I don't want to pay the 80% for the marketing. It's a great product. So a lot of brands are not selling the 20%, they're selling the 100%. And inside there's a big percentage of advertising. And then some people say, this damn advertising and marketing and all this. Yes, but if it was not there, you would not get a movement. And if we would not get a movement, people will not be rushing thinking it's the best product because they are herds. They're not looking for the best product. They're looking for the perceived best product by looking at the one that seems to be the standard. So then you can reduce your product portfolio as well. That can reduce your marketing cost. Should entrepreneurs focus on developing their business ideas? Ideas may be too esoteric. Investors do not like to hear about ideas. Investors want to hear about opportunities. It's difficult to evaluate ideas, past, present, futures, but you can evaluate opportunities. Ideas tend to be monodimensional, vague, often too focused on the product. Entrepreneurs focusing on ideas tend to minimize the importance of customers and the presence of competitors. My idea is the best. I have this great idea, better than everybody else. You see, that's what they say. It results in a company which is too much focused on therefore selling the idea versus communicating the idea and sort of informing, educating about the idea. From a general public discussion presentation, entrepreneurs should discuss the idea because it's easier to present. So if they're presenting to a lambda person, they're going to say, here's my idea. But if they're presenting to an investor, if they're presenting to a future partner, to an advertisers, they don't talk about the idea, they talk about the opportunities. So talking about the opportunity, that's what I do to you, that's what you do to me. Talking about the idea is what you do to a bystander. Okay, an idea might be what generated the motivation for someone to become an entrepreneur, but it should be supported by opportunities. Hence, the natural path is opportunities, ideas, more opportunities, adjusted ideas, or ideas, opportunity, adjustment of the ideas. So those slides, you have them. They, these are the kind of open questions that you get, obviously. This is where you get all of this stuff. And so these are, you cannot find anywhere this. You can buy entrepreneur book, you won't find this in there. These are my own little crew, my own little production. So these are the stuff that just people in my class get, essentially. But this stuff is, I think, cool and very focused and very connected to all the things that you've learned this semester. So this should give you a big boost. Do I think that you're probably challenged reading these? Yes. But I think, having known you for a little while right now, I think you the people that like the challenge. So how important are failures for an entrepreneur? One cannot learn very much from a book. The best way is to learn from your failures. Perfection is the enemy of good. An entrepreneur should not seek perfection, but momentum. Find 500 entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, and you ask them this question, they're going to say, oh yeah, momentum, not perfection. The concept I discuss in classes, I call it Darwinership, but the idea is that you have to adjust. You have to learn from your mistake. You have to survive from a mistake. The quality of an entrepreneur is to seize opportunities, constantly adjusting, not looking for zero risk. That does not exist. It's always a question of survival. It's always a question of looking for research in order to minimize failure, but you never want perfection of research in order to have no failure because that does not exist. And it stops you. It inhibits you from doing anything. You're scared. So experience is an important factor to learn to be an entrepreneur. Experience is what makes you humble. That was what the first video person who's one of the most followed entrepreneur in the world was saying, is you have to be humble and you want to learn from others. You want to help others. You want to teach others, because when you become a teacher, you become a better learner. You have to learn to observe. You have to want to discuss. You have to want to listen to older people. Older people um, doesn't mean because they're old that they should be moved out. Is they have more experience, and it should be young people learning from older and old people looking at what young people are doing in order to better anticipate the future. This is the way. One cannot avoid failure. One has to prepare for failures in order to learn from them and not do them again. I think there's nothing wrong with failure. I think there's something wrong with repeat failure. The importance of stamina is the importance of getting punch in your face and keep on going. It's like boxing. Is if you go boxing and you're going to stop the first time someone punch you in the nose, you cannot be a boxer. You box, you get punched in the nose. That doesn't stop you. It's like if you do a martial arts or boxing and you bleed, bleeding doesn't mean that you need to stop. Bleeding means that you need to change. Okay, so having a call for wanting to change the world is what you need to look for. I want to change the world on that idea, which is supported on that opportunity. That's what Steve Jobs was saying. Money should not be the focus, but it should be your desire to change the world. The difficulty for entrepreneurs is to have multiple things going on at the same time. That was my example of someone that is a good salesperson. You cannot be an entrepreneur and think you're going to succeed by just being a salesperson. The minute you're an entrepreneur, you're doing 1,000 things, and sales is one of them. And therefore, you're going to be overwhelmed. You have to find balance. You have to adjust. Entrepreneurs are different than managers. Managers constantly look for routine, ritual, processes. Entrepreneurs constantly look for changes, making change, innovating, creating. Obviously, they hate each other, these two people, because they are very different. However, they need one another. So if you're an entrepreneur, you know what's the bad news? Is you also have to be a manager if you want your company to survive. Because an entrepreneur that do a startup, that's okay, but very soon you have to turn your entrepreneurship skills into a managerial skills. And then once you're a manager and you succeed, you have to scale up. And once your business becomes bigger, quick, go back to J&D, create a new entrepreneurial spirit in your company, even if you're number one, to create the next generation product. Let's now listen to Robert Kiyosaki, who is one of the most followed and listened to and read entrepreneur in the world. And that's who I wanted to finish the video today with. For people who are fragile, I want to tell you that he's going to say something that not too many people understand. But he writes a lot of books and he makes tons of video, and that's essentially the center of what he says all the time. So what he says one thing that I think is huge, and 95% of the people don't get it, which is that if you're an entrepreneur, you're happy to work for free. Entrepreneurs are people that are capable, willing to work for free, and not too many. A lot of people will say, oh yeah, I'll work for free. But when it's time to do it, they don't. Because working for free is very humbling, but it's your opportunity to learn. It's your opportunity to excel. Anyway, let's listen to him, you'll see. So yes, that's interesting, isn't it? You essentially end up where you think you're gonna be. So there's nothing that says that you can't do it. You just have to work at it and understand that it's a process. It's a process of assemblage, like he says. And so entrepreneurship is made of goals, understanding the market, following the customer, satisfying their needs, and that is very important. The next two subjects that I'm going to talk about is the legal foundation and then the funding. So that's the last two things. So the issue with legal foundation is very important for a small business. It's this idea that you have some ethical culture. So a business to be successful need to see that they have to follow some rules. So there's the rules that is dictated by the environment, but rules that they have to create themselves. Rules in terms of who they're going to do business with, when they're going to pay people, when they going to get paid. As you want to minimize risks, you want to improve your reputation, you want to deal with people
the most fair way as possible. Choosing an attorney is very important. So I actually put choosing one attorney, but my perspective is this, is that you should choose several attorneys. Why would you choose several attorneys? Because attorneys are expensive, and there's different costs of attorneys based on their specialty. And so you want what I call the BB gun and the bazooka. Depending on what you're doing, is sometimes not effective to use the bazooka because just the BB gun will be good enough. And sometimes if you're using the BB gun when you should be using the bazooka attorney, is you're going to be losing and wasting a lot of time because people are not going to take you seriously. My experience with legal situation is that it's very rare that things go bad, like extremely bad. But I think it is very rare that things go bad longer than they should be because you didn't take care of it the right way. So getting a lawsuit, in other words, is not common. Getting into legal arguments is very common. So the better you become at dealing with legal arguments, the more you can take care of these things faster and for cheaper. When you don't know, for example, and something happens, and there's always something something's going to happen, and sooner than later, oftentimes the first thing is to run to your attorney, and then to run to an attorney who knows that you're sort of scared, and it's not very common for attorneys to be people that are really mean well for the situation. Oftentimes they are in a situation that they want to take the opportunity to charge people an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and all that. It's not to their benefits that things get so fast for the most part because they are paid by hour. So that's one thing that you have to know. So therefore, it's always good to have some level of education in order to be able to take care of some of the things by yourself, or be able to supervise what the attorney are doing in order to see if what they are doing is the most effective things. It's a little bit the same as dealing with a physician, a doctor. If you know nothing, it's very likely that you're not going to get the best treatment from an hospital, versus if you know, the more you know, the more you're going to see if they know what they're doing, they're leading you on the right path, or if they're going to do more bad than good. So some knowledge is good. So the sooner you select an attorney and the sooner you see and you develop a relationship with them, a lot of attorneys, when they're good, are going to give you free services, recommendation. Because why would they do that? They do that because they recognize that a good client relationship is very valuable in the long term. Therefore, they don't mind giving free information because they want you to succeed and stay as a client and keep bringing much bigger and regular work to them. So they are likely to want to help you because they build that relationship. And as your business grows, you develop more need for attorneys because you have more contracts, more partnerships, more territory that you're covering, and that brings more legal fees. So they see that, and they should invest in the relationship themselves. So attorneys that do not invest in your relationship, that's usually a bad sign that they're not going to be a good attorneys. To be honest, even right now, I'm wondering why attorneys don't know that they should invest in the relationship with their customers. Otherwise, the customer, but I think it's because they see a lot of businesses fail, and therefore they don't believe in the long-term relationship. So they believe in the moment and getting as much as they can from the moment, I suppose. But that's not very good. You need to draft a founder agreement. So the idea is when you start a business, if you're not by yourself, if you have other partners with who you're starting the business, you should have a single page, some kind of founder agreement, which is just a meeting of the mind in saying, today we're forming this company, this person is bringing this person is bringing that, these are the assets, the role of the people in the businesses, and how do we compensate people, and what are the equity that everybody has, and all that. You have to do that. I would say 90% of the time, maybe more, that I didn't do that, I regretted it. Every time I did something in partnership, and the last time was like 2 months ago, and there was something not too big, but I didn't do a document, and I can see it was I did it like 2 or 3 days ago, so that was long after. And so people still remember what we talked about. It was still sort of fresh in their mind. But if I waited another month or two, they would have forgot. And then we had something about the compensation where I would get a certain percentage, they would get another percentage. And we decided that we shake the hand, and then I didn't do a document. And now soon is going to be the time where we're going to get the money, and then people forget. So you have to have this principle of constantly being very legal and contractual. It's very, very important. So the mission of the business, who is the owner, what are the roles, what property you're sharing, how much capital is being brought in, and then very important is the exit strategies. So the exit strategies is how do we get rid of the partners, what are the compensation for the partners, what are the reasons that the partners could be removed. So so the thing is, you don't want to think that business can only be done if you have these documents, but at the same time, you don't want to do too much business without these documents. So here's what I want to say. Is I've done a business with some people that would do nothing unless all of this is completed, and then they would start. The problem with this is I discovered that they were losers after I spent thousands of dollars in legal fees, and they were my partners, and then I couldn't do anything because they were not good people. So I wasted weeks and money to discover afterwards. It's like saying, you know what, this girl is really pretty. I'm going to marry her and see if she could be a good wife after I married her. This usually doesn't work. So you want to sort of get to know this person and then marry this person. But at the same time, you need to have a minimum level of commitment if it's a relationship that's going to be serious. So it's this balance. So therefore, you need to have very light documents, but that sort of will be used for the basis. You want a few weeks, a few months of being able to work together and see what everybody does. See if now you can see, and it's very much a promising relationship. It's a little bit like what Robert just said, is you want to see if everybody who wants to be in this relationship is someone that is capable to work for free, or they need to be compensated from the get-go. The people that need to be compensated for everything that they do, usually that doesn't make a good partner as well, because they are people that are very pecuniary motivated. And they're sort of thinking about themselves and not the big picture. People that are very confident, so people that are very confident, they start on working. I mean, they don't do full speed, full work, but they start on working, and they work on the side on the documentation and all this. But you don't want to be someone that do everything and hope that this doing everything is also going to build the relationship, because oftentimes it doesn't work. If you do everything, you work your butt off, you get everything done in hope that your partner is going to recognize that. Oftentimes also the partner takes this against you, which means that they sort of feel that they got so much from you that you must be desperate. And therefore now they can make the negotiation of the contract much more in their favor, because you look very desperate to be doing so much. And so it's a little bit like saying that nice people are oftentimes perceived as stupid. And that's very true. So hardworking, confident people sometimes can be perceived as being too eager to join in the relationship, and then that makes it hard. So this only comes from experience. You do it 5 times wrong, 2 times right, and then eventually you learn. But the final word I want to say for this is that you want to have documentation as soon as possible in order to build this relationship, and you want to avoid disputes. It's tempting to trust people, but the best thing to do is to avoid misunderstanding by putting things on paper. Putting things on paper without an attorney, it's better than not putting things on paper. But if you put things on paper, just know that any attorney is going to cancel and erase that, because they have terms, they have way around. Even attorneys writing things have way between each other to entangle things and make it become like nil. So imagine if you're not an attorney, if they can do it between each other. So a contract is not perfection. A contract is just a little bit of cement to protect you, but it's not a fortress. It's just a bit of cement, and you want that. So obtaining a business license and choosing a form of business is very important. So obtaining a business license, it depends what you're doing. In America, I believe all businesses have to have at least a business license, but then there's many other licenses that you may have to get depending on all the different activities. So you cannot ignore that and then discover you don't have a business license and you get a fine, and that becomes a problem because you have to close your business and all that. So you have to study that. The form of that you want to have is there's multiple forms, but the four most common forms are the following. Sole proprietorship is the simplest. It's just you. The problem with this is you don't have much protection, liability protection. And also for investors, it's not good. And if you want to have a partner, it won't work. So then you have partnership. The partnership work for certain businesses, like a dentist, like a lawyer, you know, maybe in real estate and things like this, but it doesn't work for everything. And again, there's different limitations on liability and the number of partners you can have. Corporations are, with limited liability company, are oftentimes the best forms to have when you want to integrate partners, when your partners are maybe from overseas, when you want to integrate people that are investors and you want to sell shares. So to sell shares, usually the best one is the corporation. However, the corporations in general are more complicated to form, more expensive to maintain than limited liability company. However, one cannot say that limited liability companies are smaller than corporations. This is not true. I mean, Chrysler, for example, which is the fifth largest car company in the world, is a LLC. So big companies can also be limited liability company, but it has to do with how you want to pay your taxes. If you want to pay your tax directly from the profits of the company, or if you want to pay the taxes indirectly through your own personal taxes. So it's mostly a tax reason between corporation and limited liability. And it's mostly a question if you want to sell shares to the public. If you're selling shares to the public, you have to have a corporation, like a C Corp, versus limited liability cannot be sold in stock markets and things like this. So between all the forms, the difference is the cost of maintenance, the extent to how much you protect your personal assets, the tax consideration, and then the number of partners and the number of investors that you're going to have in the company. Other legal aspects are copyrights, patents, trademarks. These you have studied them. You had one class that was just on that, so I'm not going to spend too much time. But the copyright is like the sound and the words and the IDs. The patents is more of the engineering, being the utility versus the design. And then the trademark is the name, the slogan, and also maybe the sound to some extent, or the look as well. Like a website can be trademarked. A website can be copyrighted and it can be trademarked. And maybe if you have some functionality on the website, you could also have some utility or design. So now the funding. So the funding is, you can get funding from the cash flow. You can get funding from capital investments. The problem with the funding is sometimes you need money before you make any sales, and there's a lag between having money and between spending money. So where do you get money? You get money from your own personal savings, from equity, from debt, and from creative. So let's look at some examples. Personal funds is how much you've saved. The issue here is for most people, it's limited. Then you can ask for family and friends. But here there is some issues with this is if they are not involved in the business, having loan you some money could create some change in the relationship. And sometimes it's better to preserve these relationships as they are than have some new relationship based on money. So bootstrapping is the other method which consists in trying to save as much as you can. So instead of buying, you rent. Instead of buying new, you buy used. Instead of buying, you lease. you borrow, is you try to take as many corners in order to save. Maybe you get partners involved and use some of the assets and resources from your partners, and everybody sort of bring functional assets like a space for the office, a space for warehousing, existing machine, photocopy machine that they have. So you don't buy them, you just use something that they already have. Bootstrapping is being sort of smart with your money and not spending it, but sort of saving it by using it the most frugal way. You just want to minimize, and so you don't hire as many people. You try to do a lot of the jobs yourself, or you start doing some of the jobs and then you outsource the rest of the jobs. You buy things from overseas. All of these are the bootstrapping ways. So now you're going to get some money from someone, or you have two ways to get some money. Is either you get a debt through a loan, and you may have to give some collateral in order to get this money, or you sell shares of your company. Equity funding means that you lose some of the ownership of your company. Debt financing means you keep your shares, but the problem is you're going to have monthly or yearly an amount of money that you will have to give. Otherwise, you will get some penalties and you will get some credit issues. Before you get an investor, is you have to think about an elevator pitch. So elevator pitch is a short 60 seconds, 2 minutes presentation that you'll have in order to present what is your business. So what's the idea of your business? What's the opportunity supporting your business? Who cares for your business? Why would someone want to invest in your business? So here's, for example, 60 seconds and where you would have 20 seconds. So 20 seconds is to define the problem and opportunity, the need the solution that you're going to bring to what need. Then 20 seconds to explain how your solution is solving these needs and why would it work and who would care again. And then describe why would you be someone that has the competency to run this business, and why should anyone believe in you? And then you describe the return to the investor. Will it be a 10% return? And how much money do you need? How much money are you going to return? And maybe briefly what you will use the money for. I've been running a fast speech competition for 14 years. It's actually one of the oldest fast speech competition in California. So I started in 2007, and this year, it's in May, I have actually four students from CSUN competing for the Wells Fargo fast speech competition, where students are presenting a business in front of an audience. I forgot which year I was, but when I had the students, well, I guess it was the year of the cohort 1, 2011, I think it was the first cohort. And so in this cohort, I had Brian McKenzie and Robert Teagarden, and I asked them if they wanted to participate to the fast speech competition of the Wells Fargo. And they say, heck yeah, let's do it. And what was interesting with these two individuals is they were always saying yes. Every time I was saying, do you want to do this? Yes. Do you want to do that? Yes. Do you want to become a marketing professor? Yes. And so they were always yes. They actually came to the competition, and that year they actually won the Wells Fargo fast speech competition. So, entrepreneurship is a mentality. Being entrepreneurial is a mentality. It's sort of you become a yes woman, a yes man, and whenever there's something to do, because you're a doer, you do it. So obviously, I know them much more now than back then, and I can see their trajectory is always about doing things. So what are the type of investors that you can get? You have the business angel, venture capitalist, and then you also have the banks. So the business angels, they tend to invest in really beginning of startups. They tend to be all the people that are doing this as an additional income. It's a little bit of a game for them, and they invest in thousands of small businesses. They invest between $10,000 and $500,000 in each company, and they usually belong to a group, listen to many businesses looking for funding, and then they select the business that they want to give fund, and then it becomes a private investment in these businesses. So the local one that we have is we have the Pasadena Angels, the Maverick Angels, and the Tech Coast Angels. These are the ones that you find in Los Angeles. Venture capital companies are different because they are actually companies which have venture capital investors inside. So people join those venture capital companies. There's about 800 in the USA, and they put some money in these companies, and then this money they vote and select companies where they want their money to be invested. So it's different. It's more structured. They invest in companies that tends to be not so much startups, but companies that already been selling and already been running, but still at the beginning. They need money for the next stage to scale up. The venture capital firm tends to be specialized in some industries. So there would be some that are specialized in the music industry. There would be some that are specialized in the pharmaceutical industry. What they're really keen on is people that use innovation and technologies. And they look for businesses who have trademarks and patents and have already been selling. And therefore, the equity of the company is in the fact that there is some sales. And therefore, it's a company that is worth something. So it's not so much of a future potential forecast like business angel will invest. And because the investment is going to be for a while, it's going to be a larger investment. Venture capitalists invest in 3,500 companies a year on average, versus the business angel is 62,000 companies being invested per year. The stages to be vetted for a venture capital firm is much more rigorous than a business angels. Business angels, there's stages, screening stages, but there's less of them. It's faster because you're dealing with one-on-one. Versus the venture capital, you're dealing with the firm, and the firm has very strict rules. Every venture capital firm has rules. The advantage is that if you get funded by venture capital firms, that's a sign for other investors to join. So you get bigger investments, and you get more outside investors that would want to eventually join and invest in your company, even as angels investors, because they will see that you have been vetted by a very formal structure. So it gives extra weight to your company as being more likely to be vetted. But it's funny I said that because there was the company that I gave you to present in the last class, the pharmaceutical company, which I forgot the name, Theranos. And so Theranos, that was a company that was that received hundreds of millions of venture capital investments. And one has to think about what I just said, that it's very formal and structured and controlled, but yet Theranos still was able to go through and it was all fake. So it's not, nothing is 100%, but it's bigger investments than angels and more structured. I put this in here, which is from the Entrepreneur magazine, and it was What About Me? Because it's about the valuation game, and I wanted to put it there because it's really about the world that we live in right now, which is very interesting in the sense that for the most part, before 2000, before the .com internet surge, businesses were valued by the sales. It's like if you make 1 million sales, you're not as good as a company that makes 10 million sales. You're not as good as a company that makes 100 million sales. So 100 million dollar sales would be a company that is worth 2 million or whatever. Then what was another factor was the profit that you were making. The profit, the more profit you're making, the more it's valuable. Then there was another factor, which was the stock, the inventory that you had. The more inventory, the more stock, the more it was valuable. And then later on came the brand, the value of the brand as well of the business to make its valuation. So then the brand became bigger, and we even saw companies which were more valuable, like the brand was more valuable than the company. I mean, an example at the end of the 90s was Rolls-Royce and Bentley. Rolls-Royce was for sale, and Rolls-Royce was bought by Volkswagen in a bid where many car companies bid, but it was Bentley that had the biggest bid. And BMW had a bid that was almost as big as Volkswagen, but it was lower. Eventually, BMW came to Volkswagen and said, you know what? You can have the Rolls-Royce factory. You can keep the brand Bentley. You can also keep all the other brands that have been used for 100 years. Dawn, Spur, Shadow, Phantom. Maybe not. Maybe we'll argue for that. All we want is the brand Rolls-Royce. And at that time, I forgot how much they sold Rolls-Royce, but it was like something like a $80 million, $100 million. It was not a big amount. And so BMW bought Rolls-Royce brand for an amount that Volkswagen thought that they became crazy for buying Rolls-Royce for such a large amount of money. But BMW knew what they were doing because they said in this whole deal, it is possible that the most valuable thing is not Bentley, is not the factory, but it's just the brand Rolls-Royce. And we're going to buy it for 10 times cheaper. And we eventually end up with the same position. So that's what they did. And then Volkswagen, for about 6 years, made the Rolls-Royce because they had the factory. While during those 6 years, BMW built a new plant across the street from the original Rolls-Royce plant, and they called it Rolls-Royce. And then BMW is making the Rolls-Royce, and then Volkswagen is still making the Bentley in the Bentley factory, because Bentley and Rolls-Royce were just the two brands in the same factory. And you can see the power of the brand. The brand may be worth more than the entire thing. But today, what's interesting is you have many companies since the dot-com era that are not making profit, not making sales, and they're worth billions of dollars. You know, Google, YouTube, Twitter, MySpace. I mean, MySpace.
Spotify.
The what?
Spotify.
Spotify, yeah, exactly. It was for many years that this brand make no profit, and they were not hundreds of millions, they were billions. Facebook, I mean, Facebook's the biggest example, no profit, and yet we're talking worth in Wall Street for I forgot how many hundreds of billion. So since when a non-profit company is worth 500 billion or whatever? So it's very interesting that this is the era we live in. And so now as an entrepreneur, I wanted to tell you that sometimes, and that's weird, but it's okay to have a company and run it as a startup. You don't make $1, and 2 years after you still don't make $1, and 5 years after you still don't make $1, but it's worth hundreds of thousands because of the valuation that this may have, because of the reputation it has, or the platform, the followers that you have. So this is a new era as well, where as an entrepreneur, you cannot just think of the income that it's generating, but also the value of the fans that you have. And so it's something to take into account when working, maybe that you can tell to your parents or to your wife when they start investing thousands and thousands of dollars in your hobby that becomes your enterprise, that becomes this lifestyle that you have that makes no money, but maybe the valuation of what it's worth for someone, you know, it's sort of worth. I mean, what is Spotify worth to me or to you? Maybe not much, but then Spotify for Ticketmaster or for someone else is worth a lot of money because of what they can do from that platform. So it's the platform worth more than the income worth, and it's a new way of thinking that I thought is quite remarkable now, new era. And then the last slide and the last source of financing is debt. So there's two debts. There's the commercial bank debt, which will give you a loan with some collaterals, and therefore it's going to be a risk that you will take on both sides, but they will have their risk covered by the collaterals and their valuation of the collaterals. And then there is the SBA, Small Business Administration, government guaranteed loans, which is a loan which has a very low percent and which doesn't require collaterals. Essentially, it's the government that will insure you to the bank, to the commercial bank. And so with this SBA, you submit to the government, you submit a business plan to the government. So you remember, a business plan is a plan that does not exist, which has multiple plans inside: HR, finance, budget, production, operation, marketing, management, law, and executive summary. And then that's given to the SBA government agency that's going to approve you for a certain amount based on the program.
the project that you have, then they're going to submit that to several banks like Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, and then the commercial bank are going to respond that they want to offer you a certain amount, and then you're going to go to that bank and get this money, and you will have to repay it. But if in case everything falls apart, it's the government that will take care of repaying the commercial bank. So that's another formula. The issue here is the amounts that you may get are not very big. The advantage, it's another source. If you do your due diligence and if you have some assets, you're more likely to get it. Versus an investor, it's a lot of work and not that easy, and you may not get anything. Versus here, if you just have to follow the process, sort of be part of what's required, and then you're good.